Mr. President, I came to the floor having spoken at great length last week outlining why I thought this agreement was something that ought to be fully debated, fully understood, not only by members of the Senate, but by the American people. We had that debate. We were promised from the very beginning, and it was enacted into law, that Congress would be provided with all the materials talked about, agreed upon, before we had a vote to determine whether or not we would support approval or disapproval of this. Now, we had a vote Thursday which was procedural, to give us that opportunity to register our yes and no, our yay and nay. The American people deserve to know on the record where we stand on this. There have been arguments made on both sides of this issue. I think personally think a close examination of this agreement raises serious questions, so serious that it's not something that someone can come to the floor and simply say, well, that's over, that's done, and let's move on. There are more important things ahead. It's hard for me to understand what is more important than getting this right. And the issues that I laid out last week on Thursday before the vote, I think are issues that need consideration. But the real reason why we are back here, thank you, Senator McConnell, for giving us another opportunity, was because we fell 2 votes short of the opportunity to even take a vote. We took a vote on a procedural measure, a measure which we all know you can go home and hide behind. I don't understand why my 42 Democrat colleagues were afraid to put their name on a yes or no vote proposition so that everyone knows exactly where we stand. Nobody can go home and make an excuse as to why they're for it or why they're against it. It goes all the way back to the scriptures. Let your yea be yea and your nay be nay. And that has always been what I have believed to be the necessary procedure taken here in the United States Senate as well as the United States Congress, so that when we go home and the people we represent know exactly where we stand. I think what we're witnessing today in terms of the debates that will be taking place tomorrow, but in terms of the presidential nomination process, is a public partly frustrated in many ways, but part of that, I think, is the fact that there's a lot of procedural gobbledygook out there that elected members can hide behind and not have a direct clarification of exactly where they stand on any particular issue. Now, the purpose for the delay was to give, hopefully, our members the opportunity to go home, listen to their constituents about how they feel about this, and perhaps we could attract 2 of the minority group that voted to block us from going forward. That we won the majority vote, 58 to 42, on a bipartisan basis, including 4 Democrats, all of whom had significant foreign policy experience, and some having more than the rest of us. And so it was a bipartisan effort to move to this process, and we came up too short. We were hoping that over the weekend, I was assuming that many of my colleagues were receiving the same kind of calls and input from their constituents that I was. Mine was running 9-1 against this agreement. And the more we disclosed from this agreement, the more the American people learned about this agreement, the more concerned that they were. And hopefully, they expressed those concerns to their senators who went home over the weekend having blocked us from this vote. At the very least, we are pleading that we have a vote, so our yes is yes and no is no, so that we reach the threshold by which we will buy a little bit of time to hopefully expose more of this very flawed, and I think fatally flawed agreement. More time for the American people to express their wishes. And we're not talking about a normal process here of moving legislation through the United States Senate. We're talking about a process, a negotiation that will have enormous consequences for the future, enormous impact on the national safety of this country, enormous impact on the world in terms of a rogue nation now having the pathway to development of a nuclear weapons capability and weapons, unimpeded after this period of time expires. The very first thing people ought to understand is that coming down to the floor or listening to the President of the United States say that this prevents Iran from having nuclear weapons or nuclear weapons capability is false. It is absolutely wrong. This provides a pathway for them to get it. It just defers, but it legitimizes their becoming a nuclear-armed nation. And this rogue nation, which is seeding terrorism throughout the Middle East, cries death to America and extinction to Israel, will have the wealth because of the release of well over $100 billion, will have the capabilities because even under this agreement, their nuclear processing research and development goes forward with our assistance. It's in the agreement with our assistance. And so this is not something we can simply say, oh, well, we had the vote. You guys came up short, and we will cease all debate because it's over. The President of the United States said, really, it's over. It was over for the President of the United States when he declared it an agreement, not a treaty. If ever something should fall, as consequential as this should fall under the umbrella of being a treaty, it is this agreement. And yet it is declared an executive agreement. The President obviously knew what he was doing because he's had a lot of practice. A lot of practice of basically saying, I can bypass the Congress. I can bypass the Constitution by simply declaring an executive order, an executive agreement, whatever. In declaring this, it put us in a terrible position. Thankfully, we were able to secure and vote into law on a vote of 98-1, signed by the President of the United States, an agreement that would allow us to play a role in this and to look at the agreement and anything connected with this agreement before we made a decision, and the opportunity to vote on approval or disapproval. Well, all that's been denied, and the President not only says it's over, the Majority Leader Thursday said it's over, get over it, we're moving on, other things need to be done. We just heard that again from one of my colleagues here, the second in command on the Democrat side. Let's move forward. Moving forward is a violation of the law. That will be tested in courts. But it's very hard to understand how the administration and the 42 who voted for this could ignore the very language that they voted for, the very language that they agreed on, the very language that allowed us to go forward and understand what this agreement states. And let me quote from the law which was signed by the President of the United States on a nearly unanimous agreement by the United States Congress. Transmission to Congress of nuclear agreements with Iran and verification assessment with respect to such agreements. The President shall, not the President might, not the President could if he wants to, or not if he doesn't want to. The President shall transmit to the appropriate congressional committees and leadership the agreement as defined, including all related materials and annexes. Including all related materials and annexes. And any additional materials related thereto, including annexes, including appendices, including codicils, including side agreements. We have been told, we have learned, that there are two secret agreements that have been made between Iran and the inspection agency. We have not been allowed to see those agreements, despite our pleas. We have been told by the Secretary of State, they don't matter, don't worry about it. It doesn't directly affect you. Who possibly could enter into any contractual agreement, any binding agreement with the adversary and say, and not require access to the side agreements? Who would lease a car? Who would buy a house? Who would enter into any contractual arrangement with someone who said, oh, by the way, there's some secret stuff here, but I can't let you see what it is. But don't worry, it really won't affect this. I can't conceive of anybody. I mean, this doesn't take an Ivy League law school graduate or someone serving in the Congress who looks through this legislation and helps write this legislation to have people understand that this alone ought to be reason not to vote for this agreement until they have access to that material as required by the law that they voted on. So how can a member come down to this floor and simply say, I know everything about this agreement, and I like what it does, and I'm voting for it. That's their privilege, that's their right. If they want to go home and explain that to their people, that's their right to do so. But how can they go home and explain to the people, I voted for something without knowing exactly everything that's in it? Oh, and by the way, yeah, I voted for the opportunity to know that. It's in the law, but the president said, well, I'm going to ignore that. And we've heard that from this president too many times, over and over and over. I'm going to bypass Congress. I'm going to game this thing so it goes my way and not your way. No input whatsoever. So here we stand. Why again? Because some of us, many of us, the 58 of us, don't simply want to throw up our hands and say, okay, you got us, let's move on, what's next? Big deal, not a lot of consequence here, we'll worry about that later. And we're simply saying, we don't think it is over. And the actions by the majority leader here have given us an opportunity to take another shot at this. Yogi Berra said it ain't over till it's over. And I think John Belushi in Animal House said, it's over? No, it ain't over. It's not over. So it's not over. We have a vote coming up this evening. This vote this evening will give the American people the opportunity to understand that either this is going to be killed, this motion of disagreement is going to be killed through a procedural motion without those who oppose it, even though they're in a minority, but having the procedural right to do so under the Senate rules by leaving us 2 votes short of getting to that particular point. What are they afraid of? How can you come down here and you tell people this is a good agreement, but I don't want to put my name on it. This is a good agreement, but we can't keep talking about it. This is a good agreement, trust me, but yeah, the side agreements, it's too bad we had to do that, but you know, I guess we're not going to have access to that. The inspections, I was surprised what the previous speaker, a senator from Illinois, said about the inspection agreements. Who could possibly agree to an agreement, concede to an agreement that yes, we will have inspections, but yeah, you get to exclude the facility that did all the nuclear research over the last decade. We're exempted. We need an exemption from that, and we gave it to them. And also, by the way, we're not going to let you look at any of our military facilities to see whether or not we've had any militarization of this process. And oh, by the way, if you, under the agreement, think that we are cheating on some other facilities around or places where you want to make some inspections, we'll think about that. And if we agree or disagree, if we disagree, we'll go through a Byzantine process to get to the point where the clock starts running, and then we have 24 days to try to figure all this out. And some will say this goes on much longer. So I guess, you know, having said everything I've said, having done everything I possibly can do, I'm here to ask my colleagues those who think this is a good deal. I'm here basically just asking one thing, even though I have major reservations to this. I'm not even asking them to change their vote. I'm asking them to give us the opportunity to have a vote. Give us an opportunity so that we can hold our head high and go home and say, this is exactly how I came down on this, and here's my yes, or here's my no. Isn't that what the American people sent us here to do? And we wonder why they're skeptical, why 70% of the people now think you can't trust Congress? On probably the most consequential, historic vote that any of us in this body will have in our lifetime, with untold consequences, which I'm going to be talking about sometime later this week, for the future of the world, let alone for the future of America. How can we hide behind a procedural motion so that we don't have a full declaration of where the majority of this body and where the majority of the American, outstanding majority of the American people stand on this agreement? So I'm pleading to my colleagues, have the courage to stand up for what you believe in and give us a vote. Don't hide behind a procedural motion that any one of us has the capability of going home and confusing the heck out of our constituents by saying, oh, well, you know, I really, there were problems with the agreement, I think we probably fix it and so forth, but this wasn't the right time to do it, and we needed to move forward. And by the way, the end of the fiscal year is coming up, and we've got other important business to do, and it's just irresponsible for Senator McConnell to require another vote or more debate on this. They want to run from this debate as fast as they can because the American public, I can only speak for my own constituents, but I see the polls also, heavy opposition to this, 9-1 in my state, at least what's been sent to me, all through the means of receiving messages from people these days. So I'm going to end here. I see the Senator Corker on the floor, who has totally responsible for this language, which was illegally violated. It uses the word shall, and it includes the word side agreements, and anything related to this. We owe the American people to understand every possible consequence of this agreement, and then make our decision, which will go down in history. And however members vote, they will carry that. And we'll see what this rogue Iran regime will do with us. All I know is they're cheering in the streets of Tehran. They're declaring this a victory that did not cross any one of their objections and crossed every one of our red lines. Mr. President, with that, I'll yield the floor.